Welcome to another bloody review for the Bloody Asylum. My name is Craig Rosenthal.
And I'm Matt Anderson.
Today we are going to be covering the 1970 movie Equinox. And this movie is a special one for both me and Matt Anderson. We both grew up watching it. We both love this movie. It's kind of a low budget movie, and it's definitely a late night cult classic at this point. There are two different versions of this movie, though. There's a 1967 original and there's a 1970 theatrical version. And just a brief bit of history, why don't you just give us a touch of history before we watch this movie so that people know which version we're talking about.
Okay, well, Equinox, as we mentioned, there were two versions of it. There was the original version, which was made by a bunch of friends who were really wanting to show off their capabilities and came up with an interesting story, which they then released, and people enjoyed it. And then Tonlin Productions, those are the people who made The Blob, came along, they saw it, they liked it, but they felt that it needed some changes to it. So they hired Jack Woods, who came in, redirected, created some new scenes. They were lucky enough to get everybody back onto the movie, and so they added some new scenes, added a whole new character, which was played by the director Jack Woods, and then released it in 1970. Thematically, it's still the same movie, but in presentation, they are two different movies. The stories are two different. And so what we are looking at is the one that most of us saw first, pretty much the only one that ever gets released, the 1970 version. The 1968 version,
which even had a slightly different title to it. It was
right.
called the Equinox. What was the full title? A Journey into
the Unexplained or something like that.
It was something to that extent, yeah.
But the version that we're talking about is the one that we saw on late night creature features on your local independent station. And for those of you who are not from the pre-digital age, from the analog days, that was when you had to go to the UHF channel on your TV, and you had to, it's like adjusting a radio and trying to find it. So that's when I saw it the first time. I fell in love with it. AMC, American Movie Classics, would pop it on every so often. And then there was the Criterion release, which we'll kind of get into that at the end, why there's a Criterion release. And the Criterion release released both versions, so when we've watched both versions, but we're definitely going to focus on the 1971 for the most part, because that is the more
wider known version.
That's the one that most people are familiar with.
So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and watch this, and we will come back with a review afterwards. So, the movie just wrapped up.
Damn heaven!
Damn heaven!
So, the movie just wrapped up. And our thoughts on this movie, why we love Equinox so very much, and why this movie meant a lot to us, and pretty much why we felt the need that we had to review this movie. Would you like to go ahead and start off with that, actually?
Sure. I loved Equinox because it was this late night gem that I just happened to watch. I just happened to have the TV on at the time it came on, and there was something about it, the fact that it starts at the end, it unfolds a mystery, it tells a story. You know, at the time I was I was 13 or 14 maybe, I don't know. So my taste in movies were still very Star Wars, Star Trek, a lot of science fiction. This was one of the first horror films, and I use the term in a kind of a looser sense, that I actually enjoyed, other than like Halloween. So it's just something about it, just the fact that I thought it was really interesting. The story was new, it was nothing that I had seen before. struck a chord in me, and I became a huge fan of it. And then when I didn't record it on VHS, so I never could find it, and I spent years trying to find the movie. And because I loved it so much, and so many of the imagery and the scenes just kept sticking in my head.
You will not escape. In 1 year and 1 day, you will be dead.
And so I finally found it on AMC, American Movie Classics, got a copy of it, watched that, and it was pretty much a bootleg, you know, and I had commercial breaks and stuff. But I watched that until I finally it came up. I downloaded a copy of it off the internet, BitTorrent, and watched that a lot. And then it occasionally would pop up on like Hulu or some of the other subscription service, and so I'd be able to watch it. So for the longest time, I couldn't watch it and couldn't enjoy it. But then I got to be able to enjoy it whenever I wanted to, and I got to really analyze the movie. I even did a review for it for another video review series that I used to do, and talked about it's one of those so bad it's good movies. I mean, it's not a brilliant film. It's an ambitious film for the time period, and once you learn about the backstory on all the production and all that, you really realize how much heart and soul went into it. Even though they may have been limited by a lot of things, technology, acting, writing, things like that. So, but it still just has this innate charm that I really found appealing, and I just have never forgotten it, and I still love it to this day, in spite of its flaws.
So for me, the reason why I love this movie so much is much like Matt had just explained. This movie, I grew up in the 80s as just a kid, and this was one of those movies that came on like Friday and Saturday nights, like 10 o'clock at night, on Channel 20, Channel 50, these, you know, the local channels at the time. And being a big Ray Harryhausen fan growing up, I watched, you know, the Sinbad movies, Clash of the Titans, and I'm a sucker for big scope movies done on relatively lower budgets. And this is one of those movies that the scope of the story is big, even though the budget does kind of, it downscales a bit of what they were able to really accomplish with it. But the special effects, the stop motion effects, there's so much creativity and imagination that go into this movie. And like how Matt had just said also, there's clearly a lot of heart, soul, and a lot of love that went into this, and you can just feel it exuding from the movie as you're watching it. And I don't know if this movie would translate very well with a younger audience, the millennials, maybe, if they would fully understand this sort of a movie. But for a lot of us that are older and we're lucky enough to have grown up watching this, that I'm certain that most of you all feel the same way about it, this movie, that we do. So when I bought this movie on DVD from Criterion a number of years ago at this point, probably over 10 years ago now, I did not know, and much like we had discussed at the beginning of the review, I did not know that there was two different versions of this movie. So I let Matt Anderson borrow this version of the movie as he wasn't even familiar with it himself, but he has extensively researched and compared the two movies together. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. The two movies, the original movie was made in 67
is what the date says.
The date says. So around 67, and they're actually almost in a way two different movies. The original version was more of almost kind of like a random series of events that happen. The main characters, they all meet, they're getting ready to go to a party, but along the way they're going to stop by and visit one of the main characters, his name's Dave, visit the professor who's got a cabin out there to discuss something. I don't remember exactly what it is to discuss, but he meets Susan and all this, and that whole exchange is incredibly awkward, and the acting really is awful. But then they go up to the woods and they run into the professor, or they run into the remains of the professor's house.
Wow. What happened?
Is that Dr. Waterman's cabin?
Explosion. Stove or water heater, maybe.
No. It's caved in, not blown out. Doesn't look like he was there when it happened.
Because the problem is with the original versions, they put all the reveals that come in through the second version all at the beginning. So you're really not really getting the mystery. It's all kind of up front, and then they're just filling in the pieces as the rest of the movie goes. Which really just thematically is kind of a slow film in that respect. Yes, it's got the action segments with the stop motion, but it doesn't really narratively. It's just kind of, it starts off with a bang and grinds to a slow halt. There's a lot of fat in the movie. There's a lot of scenes that just really, when they finally took it, which I'll discuss after, there's a lot of just extensive scenes that just really just don't.
So the newer version is a much better paced movie.
Yes, yeah, it's certainly a lot better paced. The story itself in the original is almost different than the one in the final version, the 1970 version, the one that we are all familiar with. That there was no central villain.
Oh, hello. You the ranger here?
That's right. Name's Asmodeus.
What happens is the professor accidentally opens a rift between the dimensions of this life and the afterlife, and so disturbing the equinox, the equilibrium between the two. In the new version, they have the other side has an agent in Mr. Asmodeus, who has shape-shifting ability, has the ability to possess people's, get in their heads. And so there's a more focused antagonist in the film, that he is actively trying to stop these kids from investigating, and then once they've learned the secret, actively trying to keep them from being able to take this book that houses all the secret that allowed the professor to open the dimensional rift in the first place, get the book back because they need it in order to restore equilibrium. So in a way, the villain is actually trying to do the right thing, but he does it in a very horrible and evil way.
What are you doing?
Not a nice guy.
Not a nice guy. And so that's kind of where the biggest difference comes in. is that you can really, there's a more focused linear storyline, and a lot of the surprises are revealed through the story, where instead of just front loading all the special effects or most of the special effects and most of the ending at the beginning of the movie, the new version gives you just fractions of the ending, and then actually plays the whole ending almost all the way through at the very end again, which is really kind of nice because it adds to the mystery. Of course, cutting out the fat adds to the pacing. The pacing's faster. The centralized antagonist makes the danger more realistic instead of just, okay, what's going to happen around this corner? You know, they know that something is coming after him. Dave is very much aware of it almost from the beginning of the movie.
Stay back here, out of the way.
When they meet Mr. Asmodeus for the first time, he just senses there's something off about him. Whereas the other one, they're just kind of just responding to things as it happens.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't work, doesn't really flow as far as the story goes.
I can see it now.
So, we also, well, at least I also wanted to discuss one of the main things that I've noticed growing up when watching this movie, and once when I also watched the first two Evil Dead movies, is, and I'm just going to say it right now, there's some glaring similarities with this movie and those two films.
Hey, what do you do? Hey, tell me I don't see that.
A castle.
I asked you not to tell me that.
Only been here once, and I'm not sure it's the same area. But I sure never saw or heard of a castle.
Far out.
Mainly the fact that there's a book that contains incantations to summon demons.
Look at this character. Have a...
Yeah.
Wow. This is some piece of literature. Only it's going to be a little difficult to follow the story without a translation.
As well as the fact that there's a number of plot elements that also play into this. Now, mind you, that Evil Dead focused very much on splatter and the gorier content. So I'm more or less talking about cinematography as well as the certain plot points. There's a point at the very beginning of Evil Dead 2 where they're telling a backstory about the book. The book flies at the camera in mist. Well, in this movie, there's a sequence that is almost identical.
Absorbed in the difficult task of translation, I was at first unaware of the meaning of this rare and unique text.
As well as the fact that this movie was, in the 70s, played to youths in order to get them interested in doing special effects. One of those special effects guys went ahead and worked on Evil Dead 1. There's numerous other plot moments within both movies that are just so very similar. The idea of possession.
I just don't believe this day. You know, I keep thinking that pretty soon I'll wake up.
There's just the stop motion, although I think that in both movies the stop motion was used because that was what technology there was to create these horrific monstrosities. So in closing up this review, just real quick, Equinox is not a perfect movie. It's not even really a good movie, but it's a great piece of nostalgia. It's a fun movie to watch. You can laugh at it. You can laugh with the movie, but it's just got so much charm to it. It's hard not to love this movie.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, if you look at it from a story perspective, definitely don't look at the acting on that, because the acting is, even with the overdub and the reshoots, it's still pretty...
Acting's rough.
Yeah, it's still pretty rough. And but the charm of the story, the interesting pieces of the story, and there are some moments in there that are truly cult-worthy.
Mm-hmm.
So you can enjoy the movie without having to deeply critically analyze it, because if you do that, then you're just going to suck out all the fun. And that's what Equinox is. It's a fun movie. It's got a lot of heart, a lot of soul. You can enjoy it because of its flaws, or you can hate it because of its flaws, but you just definitely should just go and turn it on, sit back,
take your brain out,
and relax and enjoy what is truly a cult film. Alright, well, thanks again for joining us for another Bloody review for the Bloody Asylum. I'm Matt Anderson.
I'm Craig Rosenthal.
Make sure you subscribe to the link below and include it at the end of the video, and we will see you in 2 weeks.